Based on true story.
The House of Death, Shadows from the Past. Part 1, The Arrival. In the summer of 1998, Daniel and his wife, Mary, decided to take the next step in their lives and purchase a home in New York. After months of searching, they found a property on the prestigious 14 West 10th Street. Although many shuddered at the mention of the address, telling stories of its dark past, the couple thought the rumors of ghosts and tragedies were exaggerated. Despite the elegant brownstone facade, the house's price was surprisingly low. Mary was immediately excited when she saw the large living room and high-ceilinged bedrooms. "It's perfect," she said with a smile as they toured the place for the first time. Daniel, though more reserved, shared her enthusiasm. Neither of them believed in the supernatural, and they were convinced that the stories surrounding the house were simply the imagination of its former residents. A month after purchasing it, the couple officially moved in. The first week was peaceful. They spent their time unpacking, painting the walls, and decorating every corner with their personal touches. But in the second week, they started to notice that something wasn't quite right. Mary was the first to feel it. While unpacking in the master bedroom, she noticed an odd chill in the air. It was the middle of summer, yet inside the house, it felt as though winter had taken hold. "That's strange," she murmured to herself as she wrapped a jacket around her shoulders. Still, she didn't give it much thought, assuming the air conditioning might be malfunctioning. But that same night, while they slept, Mary was abruptly awakened by a whisper. It was low, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her open her eyes. She looked around, but everything seemed in place. Daniel slept soundly beside her, unaware of what was happening. Mary closed her eyes again, trying to convince herself it was just her imagination. Part 2, The First Signs. The next day, while Daniel was at work, Mary was alone in the house. She decided to continue with the decorating and headed down to the basement to look for some boxes. As she descended the stairs, she felt a presence, something she couldn't quite describe. The basement was dark and damp, like any other in an old house, but there was something more, something that made her feel uncomfortable. As she opened one of the boxes, she heard soft footsteps behind her. She immediately turned, but no one was there. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment, she thought about calling Daniel. However, she decided against it. "I'm overreacting," she told herself, trying to calm down. But the footsteps continued, now closer. Mary ran up the stairs without looking back. That night, during dinner, Mary mentioned what she had felt. Daniel laughed, trying to downplay the incident. "It's an old house, it's normal for it to make noises," he said as he continued eating. Mary nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. In the days that followed, the events escalated. Mary began to notice shadows moving through the hallways whenever she was alone. The lights constantly flickered, and the cold in certain rooms became almost unbearable. Despite all this, Daniel still didn't believe anything out of the ordinary was happening. One afternoon, while Mary was in the kitchen, she heard a loud knock on the front door. She went to open it, but no one was there. However, when she looked down, she found an old, yellowed letter. Upon opening it, she read a name, Samuel Clemens. Part 3, Samuel's Ghost. That night, Mary showed the letter to Daniel, who immediately recognized the name. "Samuel Clemens, that's Mark Twain's real name," he said with a frown. "But that doesn't make sense, he died a long time ago. Even though he lived in this house briefly, it has nothing to do with us." But Mary couldn't shake the feeling that the letter had appeared for a reason. "Maybe he's trying to communicate," she suggested. Daniel laughed, though his laughter seemed somewhat forced. "Don't be silly, Mary. This is just a coincidence." That night, both tried to sleep, but Mary couldn't. She was nervous, as though something or someone was watching her. Suddenly, a whisper filled the room, you can't escape the truth." It was the same voice she had heard days before. Mary sat up abruptly, her heart pounding. She looked around, but no one was there. Daniel slept soundly beside her. The next day, Mary decided to investigate the house's history. She visited the public library and searched through old archives. She discovered that, in addition to Mark Twain, many other residents had died under mysterious circumstances. The house had been the site of tragedies over the years, and several of its occupants had reported paranormal experiences before leaving. Part 4: Apparitions. That night, Mary began having recurring nightmares. In her dreams, she saw an old-fashioned family, dressed in 19th century clothing, walking through the halls of her house. The woman of the family always appeared sad, while the man had a stern look, as though he was hiding a terrible secret. But the most unsettling was the boy, a child of about 7, who always looked directly into her eyes before whispering, "Help me." The dreams left her exhausted, and each time she woke, she felt as though she hadn't slept at all. Daniel, worried, suggested she take a break and go stay with her parents for a few days. Mary agreed, but something inside her told her she couldn't escape what was happening. Before leaving, Mary decided to take one last walk through the house. When she entered the basement, she found an old box she didn't remember seeing before. Upon opening it, she discovered an old, dusty journal. It belonged to a woman named Emily, who had lived in the house in the early 1900s. The diary entries spoke of the same shadows and noises that Mary had experienced. Emily mentioned a man who visited the house, a man named Samuel Clemens. Part 5: The Possession. Mary became obsessed with Emily's journal. The entries grew darker, describing how Clemens, in life, had fallen into despair while living in the house. According to Emily, something in the house had driven him to madness, and though people said he had died of illness, she believed it had been something else. Mary's dreams became even more vivid. In one, she saw how Emily had been possessed by the same entity that had tormented Clemens. Mary woke up screaming, but when she tried to tell Daniel, he remained skeptical. However, that night, he too heard the whispers. While they slept, Clemens' voice echoed throughout the house, "You can't escape the truth." Daniel shot up, finally understanding that something more was happening in the house. Part 6: The Final Confrontation. On the last night they spent in the house, both knew they had to do something to rid themselves of the curse that haunted them. Mary had read in Emily's journal that the only way to end Clemens' influence was to confront his spirit directly. At 3 in the morning, the hour when the paranormal occurrences were strongest, the couple decided to face whatever was in the house. They went down to the basement, where the presence felt the strongest. There, in the middle of the unnatural cold, the figure of Samuel Clemens materialized. "The truth lies within these walls," he said with a malicious smile,